Hello everyone, welcome to the event this evening, Introduction to Local Politics and Young People's Q&A. The event today was organized by Our Bright Future, and I'm Roberta, Policy and Advocacy Manager for Our Bright Future. Our Bright Future is a program of 31 projects led by the Wildlife Trust and funded by National Lottery Community Fund that brings together the youth sector and the environmental sector. And the program reached more than 100,000 young people in the first 5 years. Young people in Our Bright Future created 3 asks. First one, learn more in and about nature. The second one is for them to have more opportunity, more support to get into green jobs. And the third one is to get their voices heard by decision makers and policy makers when decisions are made. So the event today linked really well with the ask number 3. And I think that it's an invaluable opportunity for the young people to get involved in the local elections as well as the national elections, and also to stand for elections, especially for the parish councils, as we will hear more this evening. So looking at the overview of the session, there will be Rachel Coxcoon, Our Bright Future Steering Group member and a local politician. And then we will have Claire Goldfinch, project officer from the National Association of Local Councils. Then we will have a short break and a Q&A facilitated by a young person, our fantastic Gemma. And then we will wrap up with some suggestions, steps to take forward. And so without any further ado, I'll hand over to Rachel. Rachel, hand to you.
Okay, great. So thank you for that introduction, Roberta. So yeah, my name's Rachel and I'm here tonight with 3 hats on really. As was just explained, I am a member of the steering group for the Our Bright Future scheme for young people in the environment. And that's partly because I work for an organisation called the Centre for Sustainable Energy, which is based in Bristol. It's a non-profit organisation that's been around since the late 70s actually, and we do work around climate change and fuel poverty. And we're one of the organisations that supports the Wildlife Trust in the delivery of the Bright Green Future programme. So that's kind of pretty much a full-time job for me. But on top of that, I'm also a local politician, which I do at Cotswold District Council in Gloucestershire. And that's something I was elected to in 2019. So I've been doing it for a couple of years now. And it's something that I've just learned such a lot about how decision-making happens at the local level and in my community. And I've been really surprised at some of the discrepancies I've seen in my time as a local politician around what I feel is a serious lack of diversity. Very few younger people, very few people from ethnic minority backgrounds, very few people who are not, of a certain level of education and so on. And I feel that it's an area that could be more diverse. And it's an area where young people could make a huge difference. And there's nothing really stopping you from running from local government as soon as you're 18. So I thought I would come along and talk to you about how that can be done. So can I just check that you can see my slides? A thumbs up, you can see. Yeah, okay, great. So I just very briefly, I think when we hand over to Claire's going to talk about this in more detail, but I just wanted to very briefly explain what I mean when I talk about local government in the UK, in England in particular. Wherever you live, you will probably have either 1, 2 or 3 layers of local government around you. In some areas, if you live in a county, like in Gloucestershire, you'll have a county council. And inside that county council will be 4, 5 or 6 district councils, sometimes called boroughs. And then inside those, there may be hundreds of parish councils, which are kind of village and town scale. So if you live in a rural area, there's a good chance that you've got these 3 layers of government around you. The county will be looking after things like schools and so on, and adult social care. The district will do all the planning system and housing. And then your parish will do a surprising amount of local things that you may not be aware of. For example, looking after all your local green space facilities, allotments, parks, play facilities, bus shelters, as well as quite a few buildings in your town sometimes, particularly if you have a big town council. In other parts of the country, that middle layer is not there. The district council is sort of wrapped up into the county council, and you get something called a unitary. And where that's in a big rural area, again, you'll have parishes inside that. In urban areas, in dense urban areas, so like London or Sheffield or what have you, you might find that that's really what all you have is that unitary council around you. So where I'm from, where I represent, is the first kind. We have a county council, districts, and then lots of parishes. And there is an organisation called the Local Government Association, which does a lot of work for working with local authorities, so those district and county councils. And a couple of years ago, they did a survey looking at the diversity of local politicians. And I just want to sort of show these to you really to show you what I mean, because I think this backs up some of the concerns I've had from just sort of being in this environment for a couple of years. So looking at it within that level of local government, and I think this is borne out at the parish level as well, but possibly more extreme in some cases, you know, over the last sort of 15 years, this is the kind of age profile of local politicians. And I find it hilarious that I'm often referred to as one of our young politicians. I'm 46 years old, and I don't think in the history of human evolution, almost half a century of life has ever qualified as young. And yet I'm referred to as a young politician. So, you know, over 40%, as high as 45% of local politicians have been, over the last 10 years, retired. The number in full-time employment actually dropping off, which I find slightly worrying, and some in part-time employment. And that unemployed section will probably include students as well, where there are a few. Again, we know that this doesn't bear out in the kind of national mix. We aren't a 70% male country, so women are underrepresented in local government. And then we also see that, you know, that employment, the retirement level is borne out in the age brackets as well, in that, you know, the majority of local councillors are over 60. And obviously to some degree that plays out about having time on your hands and wanting to give something back to your community, which many retired people do. And when I came to local politics, out of a sense of total frustration really about how my local area was being run, for me, it was a sort of, oh my Lord, I've got a full-time job and 3 children to look after, you know, can I really fit this in? And I kind of wished I'd known about it when I was younger. I so wished I had gotten involved 15 or 20 years before, when actually I would have had more time on my hands and maybe less of those other work-related responsibilities as well. But also as a personal development opportunity to get into this at a young age, I think is just an incredible opportunity. And similarly, in terms of diversity, again, this doesn't reflect the mix that we see nationally in terms of what the diversity of ethnicity is among local politicians. And so, you know, there are various reasons why I think young people should be getting involved. But I think it's also particularly important that young women and younger people from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds are really looking at, you know, whether their communities are reflected in the government that serves them locally. So to tell you a bit about me and what made me get involved in politics, I'd worked, as I said, for the Centre for Sustainable Energy, and I've worked there now for nearly 15 years. And I lead a lot of work on planning and on engaging with communities around climate change and the climate agenda. And I worked with a lot of local authorities as part of my job, and I was constantly talking to officers in local authorities, the staff there, and I was helping them write plans and so on. And I was doing a lot of work about how we can help local councils demand more. You know, when houses get built in your local area and you walk past them, you think, why haven't they even got solar panels? That's so frustrating. And I found that I was just quite irritated about the fact that the council where I lived didn't seem to be doing any of these things that I knew were possible, because with my professional hat on, I was working with councils who were doing these things. And the town I represent is called Moreton in Marsh. It's in the North Cotswolds. That's where I'm a councillor for as part of the bigger district. We had 800 homes built in 10 years, you know, relatively small town, and just with almost no sustainability credentials related to them at all. Nothing about public transport, nothing about decent cycle routes, walking to school routes, none of that. No solar panels on the roof, houses that just were not fit for the future, in my opinion, as a climate change professional. So I put myself forward for election in 2017 originally in the county council election, which was huge. That covered a huge area, and it was a really good way of testing what this was all about. I didn't win, and you may well find that politics isn't all about going in and winning the first time. Some of it's about building up your experience. But I did run again in the district council elections 2 years later, where I'm really pleased to say that not only did I win, but some of the colleagues in my party also won enough that we tipped the balance of power and were able to take control of the Cotswold district from the previous administration. And this is where I feel like it's so important to realise the level of influence you can have. The first thing I did within a month of being elected was to make this district council declare a climate emergency. That had not been on the table with the previous administration at all. And I did that through something called passing a motion, which I always think is a slightly funny term because it makes me think of my grandma and it sounds a bit old fashioned, but I'll explain that in a moment. And then another motion which we put through around securing funding. This is an organisation, a council that had never really done detailed work on sustainability or climate change, so we didn't have any staff. So making sure that we were putting money into that was a great thing to do. Other motions on securing funding to do the work we needed to understand, where can we build renewable energy in the district? All this knowledge that the council didn't have, and now recently secured money so that we can have our own sustainable transport officer, so that we can help build those plans for local people, looking at investing in really big commercial scale solar farms, and training all our staff on carbon literacy so that everybody really takes the climate emergency seriously. And this was just not on the cards before. So I feel that the impact you can have at local politics is really quite extraordinary. So you heard me mention going through emotion, and you might be thinking, well, I don't know anything about that. This is not for me. I haven't got enough experience. And I just want to be really clear that neither did I know any of that. And that's almost inexcusable in someone who had been working with councils for a long time. So don't feel remotely put off by thinking, I don't know how councils work, because all of that, and particularly if you're looking at the town and parish council level, NAUC, provide this background training for councillors there, but the local government association does the same at the district council level or if a county council and so on. And I kind of, even after having done all that council work and work with councils, I thought the officers were in charge because those were the people I dealt with. And it turned out they weren't in charge. The politicians were the people who made the decisions, of course, about who got to spend what money on what, and whether we would even have a member of staff working on the climate change. And just how Rishi Sunak, or whoever was the treasurer before them, the chancellor, comes out and waves their red box and does a budget. So this happens, not in quite such a fancy way, at council level, even right down to the parish level. In ever decreasing circles, local people are deciding what will have money spent on it and what won't have money spent on it in your area. And if you are one of those people, you can have a say in what money gets spent on in your area. So a question I often think of, is this idea about kind of what comes into your head when you think about the words climate activist. And I suppose for a lot of people, the picture on the right of the young woman sitting on the stairs surrounded by the placards comes into your head, and you would be unlikely to think of a parish council meeting when you thought climate activist. But actually, I think of myself as a climate activist, and for years I've written angry letters to my MPs and asked them why this is not better and why we're not doing better on this, and asked them why we can't have more of that. And I've voted with my feet and I've joined in with protests. And I'm a climate activist. That's what I would call myself. But I'm still a climate activist now. But instead of writing to my local councillor or sending a stroppy email to my MP asking them to do the right thing, I'm suddenly in a position where I can determine what the right thing is and how we should be getting on and doing that. And I feel I've achieved more for the Cotswolds in 18 months than I had in the previous 7 years, or whatever it was that I'd lived there, because I'm now involved in setting the policy and changing the regulation. And so, as I said, I'm obviously, in my 40s, and there'll be people thinking, well, that's all very well. And you had all this professional experience behind you and that gave you the confidence. And yes, that is true to a degree. I think, if you're used to working in certain environments, then you might feel now I can cope with this. But it isn't unheard of for people to be joining local politics straight in as soon as they sort of turn 18. And so I want to introduce you, as it were, digitally to someone I'm very proud to call a friend, a man called Joe Harris. Joe Harris is actually technically my boss, I suppose, in my Cotswold District Council life. Because Joe is the leader of Cotswold District Council and is the youngest council leader in the country at 26. I think he might have just been 27 last week, in fact. But Joe was in that role, that image on the right is taken from the Cotswold District Council website, and it shows Joe and then the cabinet. So that 8 people there are the cabinet. This happens at local government everywhere. we are the ones who between us broadly set the direction of travel for what the council is doing. And Joe is the leader, and it's absolutely the case that we are actually all old enough to be Joe's parents, but that doesn't mean he doesn't get to sort of pretty much boss us around, which I think is great. But although he's 26, 27 now, Joe actually got into politics at 18. Cotswold district has at the heart of it a town that some of you may have heard of, a fairly big town called Cirencester. 25,000 people or so live there in market town terms. It's a good sized one. And when Joe was 18, he stood for election at the town council level and was elected. I think that was back in 2011 from memory. And then was elected again to that, and actually became the youngest mayor in the country as well, because he was the mayor of Cirencester. And then shortly after that, he ran for election in the Gloucestershire County Council elections, where he was also successful. So ended up wearing two hats. And then 2 years later, ran for election in the district council elections and became a district councillor, and ultimately in 2019, leader of the council. And I think by getting involved in local politics in this very direct way at a very young age, Joe's influence on his local area has been immense compared to most people of his age. And the voice of young people is central now, I think, to what the council does, not least because the leader is himself a young person. And we have environmental issues and housing affordability and all these things that are at the heart of what the council does, partly reflect the part that we have a younger leader than most councils. And I think this is a reason why it's so important. You know, your area is your area and will be your area for longer because you're younger. So, you know, get involved now. This I just want to show you is an extract from the corporate plan for the Cotswolds. Every council has to have one. This says what we're going to do. And ours has these two pillars within it. This is a new plan that we wrote in 2019. And you can see that one of our key pillars that we want to work on is to respond to the climate crisis and to make our local plan green to the core. That's the thing that determines what can get built where and who has to build to what standard. And I can pretty much say with conviction that if it wasn't for me running for election and really getting stuck in with the climate stuff and really bringing that passion for the climate emergency into my local political life, that I don't think those two pillars would be there. So I feel that this is a way of you having real influence. So you might say, well, do I have to be a politician to be in politics? You might want to. If you want to run for the county or district level, they tend to be run along groupings and political lines, but that's certainly not the case at the parish level. And you can use a website called Political Compass, which is just fun to find out where you are on the spectrum. And what I find useful about that is that I'm a Liberal Democrat, but if I use the Political Compass site, I'm actually not really a Liberal Democrat. I'm much farther across to the left and further down than most people. And so to some degree, whether or not you join a party is partly just about whether you feel you can get on with the local people in that party in your area, or you might want to just stand as an independent. So the first thing you'd want to do if you were interested is see if your council is actually up for election this May. And the best way to do that is phone your council and ask to speak to the returning officer and chat with them about what you need to do to get nominated. And then work out exactly where you live. So where would you be running for? And there's a useful map, the election maps from the Ordnance Survey will show you what parish you live in or what ward you live in. Then think, you know, do you want to join a party or not? You've got reasonably little time left now to do that if you want to do that for this May's elections. And if it were a parish or town council, I really don't think you'd need to bother. And I think if you are going to run as an independent locally or join a party, just have a think about who you want to win around there and whose vote you might be splitting if you do that, because that might be important to you. I would say at this stage, with the elections in May, it would be very, very hard to win at a county level because there will have been months of campaigning going on, and those are really big divisions. District, similarly, it's very late in the day. Some of those wards are smaller. That's a lot of door knocking still. Right now, I'd be thinking about standing in a parish and town council election if this was my first foray into elections this late in an electoral cycle. So yeah, parish and town council election also have this other thing, which I think Claire will touch on, a democratic deficit, really. There are lots of councillors at the parish level who are elected unopposed. So there isn't really a contested election because literally not enough people put themselves forward for election at that level. And that is a real disaster for democracy and a real disaster for sort of representation at the local level. But it does also mean that your chances of getting elected at that level are a bit higher. And so I would really think about doing a bit of digging. Do you live in a parished area? Do you live in a place with a town council? Is this a good place for you to start and kind of have a go this time? have a look, dig about. You can find the election results from last time or from the last 2 or 3 times. How many votes did your parish councillors actually get to get elected? Did they even actually have to get any votes, or were they elected unopposed because not enough people put their names forward for the number of seats? And if you think it takes 200 votes to get elected to my parish council, then think, can I knock on 400 doors? Can I post 400 leaflets in the next month? You know, these are some kind of mental maths around parish council elections that you might want to start doing if you're thinking to run for that level. And, you know, definitely start making contact with your local political parties. If you're coming up to 18 and you think you want to join and you think you want to do that and take a run at it this time, they might be looking for candidates. They might not have a lot of resource to put behind you this late in the day, but they might certainly still be willing to talk to you about it. And in about a week, I think Roberta can confirm, we'll be publishing a little guide on, but firstly, how to engage with your politicians as well locally and what questions to ask, but also summarising some of what I've talked about and giving you some more detail about what to do next if you are interested in standing for local government. And that's it from me. So I think that I'm going to hand over now directly to Claire, who's going to tell you a lot more about that tier of local government around parish and town council and the work of the National Association of Local Council, and give you some kind of inspiring case studies about what some local councils have done around climate and environment issues. So I will unshare my slides.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel. That was such a great presentation and a great way to get us started on what I'm going to be speaking about today. Hopefully you'll be able to see my slides. Yep, cool. Thanks everyone for the thumbs up. So just a quick introduction for me. My name is Claire Goldfinch and I'm the Project Officer at the National Association of Local Councils. And I know local government and local councils is a really, I guess, overused term, because obviously we're talking about, as Rachel have mentioned, 3 levels of local government, but we like to also call ourselves local councils, but we mean specifically parish and town councils, which are the lovely little ones at the bottom. So just to run through exactly what Rachel was talking about earlier, so county councils are much more of a strategic oversight, so providing services such as education, social services and waste disposal. Borough councils, and that's also your district, are responsible for local services such as rubbish collection, housing and planning applications. And then parish and town councils are much smaller, so it's more about local services such as allotments, parks and community centres, and they may provide other services with agreement of the county and district council. So parish and town councils. There are roughly 10,000 parish and town councils in England, which is a staggering number, seeing as so many people have never heard of parish and town councils. We think there are roughly 100,000 councils and there are elections every 4 years. But just to touch on what Rachel was talking about in the previous talk about the democratic deficit, which is a very serious issue. And we find that a lot of our councils either have vacant seats, so at the moment you may not even have to stand for election because there might be a vacant seat already on the council that they're looking to fill. Also around election time, people might not want to stand for election because they either think it's a waste of time, a waste of money, or such a long process if they know that they're going to get voted on anyway. So I think if everyone who is passionate about local politics and passionate about their area stood for election, we would be in a much better situation than we are at the moment. So our councils collect a precept, which is a local tax to pay for projects and services. And this is something that at the moment is uncapped, which is excellent for us, because that means that that our councils can choose the projects that they want to put that money into and collect that specific amount. So we've seen councils take on much bigger services such as local swimming centres or child's playgroups, kind of big establishments that can really help local services. Our councils are community hubs and the way that they can work with other bodies and local leaders, which is obviously very important when delivering local services. And if you do not live near a parish and town councils, we do encourage you to try and set up your own council. It is possible, and we have had some really successful campaigns over the past couple of years. So just a little touch on parish and parish meetings, town council meetings. So as you can see at the bottom, 2 pictures is what we're kind of used to. It's people in a big room. It's could be quite formal, quite scary, but they are open meetings. You are very welcome to attend any parish and town council or any local meeting that you so wish. And even more so on Zoom now. I've got lovely pictures of Zoom meetings, and obviously our infamous Jackie Weaver, who I'm sure you all know about. And so we have found that a lot more people can now participate when they haven't felt that like they could before. This is obviously great for not only the sector, but for people to be able to get involved in what they think are important subjects. And again, if you are either interested in standing for election or you just want to find out more what's happening locally, I encourage you to go and find out that information, because it is all free and available. And you do not have to stand for a councillor this time around if you do not want to. You could also just volunteer at your local council, and that could be getting involved in specific projects, attending meetings, or even just getting involved in consultations when councils are asking for public opinion. One thing that I really want to get across today is that local councils can make a very big difference. I'm sure that as you're all actively engaged in politics in general, government moves very slowly. Decision making is very, very slow, but local government can be really fast and change really quickly. And if your voice is not being heard in those decisions, they will never be. So if you are passionate and you actually want to make a difference and make a change in what happens in your area, I would encourage you to stand for election or just to get involved and make sure that your voice is being heard. And I move on to my next lovely picture, an array of pictures, is around the first parish council in Wilmington, which is in Kent, which is where a colleague at work lives very close to. This is a picture in 1895, which is roughly around when parish and town councils were formed. And I think this is a very great image to show of what people think parish councils look like. You know, it's a group of men sat around a table having a chat about the village green. This is such a false idea of what parish councils could be. They have incredible potential. They were, even in those days, they were all so passionate about where they live. And I think that's something that's really important to get across, is that if it's about your area, it's about what you want to see change, or what you think can be the future of where you live. And even back then, they were fighters and champions of what they believe in, of what is necessary locally. And this is what we've come to now. This picture was taken, I believe, in 2015, and it's the first parish council in London, which is in Queen's Park. So again, it doesn't have to be in your rural areas. It doesn't have to be not for you. I think the main point I'm trying to get across today is local politics is for everyone. And don't feel like you don't have exactly as Rachel said, don't feel like you don't have the professionalism or the information to not get involved, because it's an open forum for your voice. And just look at the difference between these two pictures of how far we've come. And that doesn't mean that we don't have so far to go, but it means improvement has been made, and that your voices can be heard if you get involved. And these are some other pictures of some lovely councillors that we are very proud of. And again, they look like everyone, because that is what local politics is. It's people who are passionate coming together, who are not, you know, the classic male, pale and stale, although that is a very big issue and something that we are very actively trying to encourage people from different experiences and backgrounds to get involved. But that doesn't mean that this isn't already happening. And I think talking to forums like this today can only be a good thing to get definitely more younger people involved. And even for our International Women's Day, which was on Monday, we sort of ran some polls and trying to get, again, the voice out to women as well. And people love being a councillor. We know that it takes roughly 3 hours a week to be a parish and town councillor, which is obviously a much smaller time commitment than it is further up the chain. So that means you could work full time and still be able to do this, or be a student and still be able to be a local councillor. And I think that's something that's really important. So people polled to really get involved and help their community, and 93% of women polled would recommend being a councillor. And something that I'm really passionate about is our Make a Change campaign.
So this is something that I launched in November 2020, and this was to really get across that we need everyone who is passionate and people from all different backgrounds, experiences. But exactly as Rachel said, there is a very big issue around who is in our positions of power. And if we could get people who are passionate about different things, have different experiences, exactly different levels of education, different levels of, I guess, political viewpoint as well. Although I must note that our local parish and town councils are not usually political, and that's, I'd say, 90% of the time. And that's because, again, our councillors are not paid. So that's probably why. They are passionate about their communities and they seek to make a change to help improve the lives of residents, and they run numerous services depending on the size of the council. So through this, we really wanted to get across that our councils are for everyone. And I don't know if this is going to work, so you may have to bear with me. Can you see my new screen, or is it still the same one that was before? Same one, okay, thanks. I'm going to have to stop sharing and reshare. So a part of our Make a Change campaign, we made multiple posters, as well as multiple posters, leaflets, flyers, again, to get the voice out. And a part of this work was to make videos with our councillors. I'm just going to show you a quick one today. And this is from Emily Benner, who is a parish councillor at Croxley Green, which is in Hertfordshire. So hopefully this will work and the sound work. Can you hear this? No.
You need to optimize when you share screen, click at the bottom, optimize for video.
Oh, thank you.
So you might have to unshare and then reshare, but click the little text at the
Okay.
bottom.
Thank you for that. Let's try again. Can you hear this?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Emily Benner and I'm part of Croxley Green Parish Council in Hertfordshire. I became part of the Parish Council when I first moved to Croxley Green after seeing all of the incredible work that the Parish Council did. I was also really impressed that they had budget to spend, so some of the great ideas I had that I wanted to implement in the community, I would be able to after joining the council. My specialist project from joining the council has been to make it more diverse, both within the council and also some of the activities that we promote across the area that I live in. So that's been things like running fun events. We ran a pumpkin carving competition. I've run a quiz night. We've done a schools competition where the local children come up with ideas to improve the community. And I've also been trying to get more women to join the council and people of all ages, as when I joined, it was mostly retired men. My biggest contribution to my local area is running a project alongside the council called Violet's Gift. We support people in local care homes that have no loved ones, and we extend that beyond Croxley Green because the support has been huge. So last year we were able to provide gifts for over 1,000 people with no loved ones in local care homes. You too can make a change by becoming a local councillor.
Stop sharing. I think exactly as Emily was saying there. Oh no, it's going to play again, isn't it? No, stop. Okay. I think exactly as Emily was saying there that you know, just by joining the council, she wanted to make her voice heard, and by sitting on the council and by having decisions to play with money, you can really make a change of what's happening in your town or area locally. Let me go back to my presentation. Wonderful. Oh my goodness. Okay, fab. So some of the things that we are doing at the National Association of Local Council, working with young people, is we have a Star Council Award every year for people aged 18 to 30. So on 2019, unfortunately they were cancelled due to coronavirus last year, but in 2019 we had one winner and 2 runners-up, and Emily was one of them. And also over the next coming years, young people is something that we're really going to try and focus on connecting more with, which is obviously one of the reasons why I'm here today to talk to you all. But what some of the things we're trying to do is to really highlight the work that our councils are already doing with young people, whether that's supplying with services or supporting people through a youth council. So if you are under 18, that is an option for you. Please do find out if there's any local youth councils near you. And we're also looking to create a young councillors network as well, so really create that bond with each other. So I definitely watch this space. And as you know, one of the big themes at the moment is climate change. I just wanted to show you how actively engaged our councils are already with climate change. So each of the blue dots you see on the map on the right, that is a parish and town council that has declared a climate emergency. During December to March, we did some polling of our councils to find out what was important to them. And so we found hundreds and hundreds of councils are already declaring climate emergencies. But unfortunately, they do not feel like they have the knowledge or the expertise to really action things on the ground. And I think that's something where people who are passionate and have a real keen interest in that area can actually make such a difference. And whether that's with decisions of the council, and that's such as like tree planting, rewilding green spaces, projects like carbon neutral targets, solar panels, funded projects, the neighbourhood plan, which is something that some local councils undertake, which basically is like a big group project where you understand like the housing necessities of the area or services, and climate change obviously is such a big important factor in that. Understanding transport strategy, so buses, walking paths, cycle paths, and also I think something that's very underrated, which is trying to influence the hearts and minds of our community. If you think we have 10,000 councils, 100,000 councillors, imagine the reach across England if every one of those councillors took the climate emergency as seriously as we all do. Some examples of councils that I just wanted to quickly highlight. One of them is Frome, who I absolutely adore. They're an incredible council, and I would definitely urge you all to go and check them out. So they're definitely one of our most passionate councils around climate change. So they've actually introduced their own solar funding project, and that's by working within the community to be able to provide residents with cheaper solar panel funds, so more people, whether you're richer or maybe don't have the funds, can put solar panels on their roofs. They've hosted climate change talks with other local councils, created a climate emergency paper which they've actively shared with other local councils. They promote green transport, whether that's cycling or walking routes. They've organised a sharing hub for household items so that waste can be reduced. They're looking into a council-owned wind turbine, which is just really cool and really exciting. And also a lot of councils do organise community fridges, again to support people who have been really hit during coronavirus, and again like to reduce a lot of waste. And another council that I just wanted to highlight as well is Baildon Town Council, who came up with the idea with the help of a resident to create a forest, which again is incredible. So with support from the Forest of Bradford and Friends of the Earth, they created the Baildon Tree Planting Partnership. So they identified areas and suitable plants to plant, and also planted just over 700,000 trees, which isn't a ridiculous number. So again, by working, even if it's just in your local area, the reach that you can have as a council is unbelievable. So just my final point, if you do want to get involved in your local council, do get in touch with Nauk. I will put my email address in the chat and can be shared afterwards, because we definitely need people who are actively engaged, who want to make a change and who believe they can. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you. So now we've got a break. Originally we planned for 10 minutes, but since we are running late, if you don't mind, it would be better to have 5 minutes so that we can get more time for the Q&A, for the young people to ask the questions. And so we will be back at 10 to 7. Yeah, so see you in 5. So Gemma will facilitate this part of the event by bringing your question to the speakers. So if you want to ask any questions, type in the chat, and Gemma will ask those questions to the speakers. Gemma, are you ready?
Yes.
Perfect. Let's start.
I'm not sure if this is a question for everyone, but we've got Ellie in the chat who's asking how we would be able to do that. And I assume by that she's talking about running for local council.
Yeah, so I've just been having a bit of a conversation with Ellie in the chat about potentially becoming a parish councillor. I would say an easy way to check if there are any vacancies is to get hold of your electoral officer, which will be in your district or borough council. I don't know if Rachel, if you have any experience of doing that?
Yeah, every council, there is, in that big stacked up list of types of council, it is the district council whose job it is to run elections. So the people that have to set up all those polling booths and all that kind of thing. And they are required by law to employ somebody called a returning officer. That's one of the jobs they have to have. And that person's job is to oversee all the elections, and they will have a team of other people working with them. So for you, Ellie, you just said Nottinghamshire. Nottinghamshire will be your county. Nottinghamshire is one of those places that also has districts underneath it, as far as I'm aware. So you will have a much more local council, might be Nottingham City Council or one of the other outlying ones. And it will be there that they will be able to advise you as to whether there are elections happening. So not every council has its elections. They're always in May, but each May it's different councils that are up for election, and some councils, so I was running training for Sheffield City Council today, some councils every 4 years every seat goes up for election, and in some councils they do something called up in thirds, where every year for 3 years a third of the seats are up for election, and then there's like a rest year. So by phoning up and just asking to talk to your returning officer, and I think they're actually required by law to talk to you, if you know what I mean. They're not allowed to say, go away and stop bothering me with your silly questions. They have to kind of advise potential candidates on how to get involved and help you with any questions you have about the nomination forms and that sort of thing. Does that answer your question, Ellie?
If you want to write, Ellie, in the chat.
No, that's fine, Ellie. You don't need any experience. You honestly don't. You know, like my friend Joe, who's now leader of Cotswold District Council, he didn't have any experience of being a councillor when he was 18, and he put himself forward for the town council, and neither did I. And what I found, you know, I introduced my talk with this concern I have about how not diverse the group of councillors is. And you know, don't take that as a sort of criticism that these are somehow dreadful people. Actually, what I have found is how helpful and how supportive those more experienced councillors have been, and how I've been, you know, I've only been doing this 2 years, and, you know, I've just learned as I've gone on. But there's certainly no expectation that politicians have knowledge of being a politician before they're a politician, or of local government. You know, that's and NALC, as far as local councils, parish and town councils are concerned, there's training courses, there's backup, there's support. And similarly at the district and county level, there's something called the Local Government Association that provides similar courses and so on for elected councillors. Back to you, Gemma.
Thank you for that. Our next question is from Jay Panadam, and he's asking, do you need to have any previous experience, and do you have to have been a local resident for a while to gain credibility?
In terms of parishes and so on, I'll leave that to Claire to maybe comment on. Certainly at the district or council level, you would, oh, thank you, Jay. If you're going to join a political party, then you will be kind of grouping with them around a manifesto. And actually that's something else I should have mentioned, which was when I said to my local, which in my case was the Liberal Democrats, but other parties are available, you can, you know, I want to sort of work with you on this, and I'd like to stand as a candidate. I actually then had the opportunity to shape our manifesto that went forward for the election, which at that point was already in draft form. but had very little in it at that time about climate change and sustainability. And I was just sort of really given free rein to go through and put a load of stuff in it. And the miracle there was that once we won, those things suddenly became a reality. But actually, do you know, one of the most powerful things I found was just writing a letter. I wrote a letter that was, you know, A5 sized, handwritten letter that I just posted through doors of I don't know, 400 houses or something where I lived. And it just said, you know, I'm Rachel and I've lived here for these years and I've got some kids and these are the things that bother me and I'd really like to help fix them. And would you mind voting for me? You know, I mean, it was like the least professional manifesto ever, but I actually did even get emails from people saying, thank you for writing me a letter. And actually people receive so many actual letters these days that it was probably quite memorable.
And yeah, just to touch on local resident, when you say a while, do you mean that you've just moved to a new area? Okay. Yeah, basically, as long as you live in the vicinity of the local council, whether that's the town council or the parish council, you are able to stand. So you don't have to be, you know, in the air, like say, for example, we speak about Nottinghamshire. If you move to Nottinghamshire tomorrow, you wouldn't then have to wait an X number of years to stand for the council. You could say, oh, I've just moved to Nottinghamshire, but I'm really passionate about X, Y, Z, and that's why you should vote for me.
And that's a bit different at, I'm not terribly familiar with parish level elections, but if for district and county levels, there is a residency requirement. So for the Cotswolds, for example, you would have had to have lived in the Cotswold district or worked in the district or owned or rented a property in the district for 12 months leading up to the date of your nomination. So I'm not sure if it's, I don't really know the difference at parish level, but again, those are questions to ask your returning officer. You just phone up and say, what are the eligibility requirements, and tell them what you are, and they will let you know. And actually what I don't know about is students as well. You know, if you're kind of resident in two places, whether you could stand in one and not the other, or whether in theory you could stand in both, that would be another question to ask.
I'm not sure. That's a really good question to ask.
Who knows?
Claire, could I ask you, are you okay to stay 5 minutes, 10 minutes longer for this question? Yeah?
Very
okay.
happy, yeah.
Okay, good. So, Gemma, you could continue with the questions.
Yeah. So our next question is, as someone who lives in Lewisham Borough in London, what options may be available for me?
So that's an unparished area, isn't it? So
yeah, we only have one in London, and that's Queen's Park Community Council. So like I said in my presentation, there are options to create your own council, although this does take a lot of work. If I were you, I would have a look at maybe looking at Lewisham Council to see if you can get some other volunteer experience, or even just to attend a meeting. I think that'd be a really good way just to understand a bit more of the process of how things work. Rachel, I don't know if you have any other suggestions.
Yeah, I would. So London is a little bit of a special case actually, in that you have in London 26, I think it is, London boroughs, and they have all the powers of a unitary council, which I don't know if you hear right at the beginning, but that's, you know, that means every single one of those boroughs does both education and adult social care and roads, as well as planning and all of those other services. But the London boroughs are overseen by something called the Greater London Authority, which is almost like a massive county council for the whole of London that has even higher powers. So in London, I think, you know, because there are no parishes, you've got the option of either getting involved in things like local residents groups or having, but if I were you, I would look at the borough council itself. And actually with the training that I do with a lot of councils, I tend to find that the age profile of urban councils is slightly lower. You don't, it's those big rural councils where you go in and you're like, blimey, this is entirely a room full of men over 60. It's less pronounced in the big cities. And then I think what you've got to do is just be really honest with yourself about your politics, about how that borough is currently run. You know, I've been working with some councils where they haven't changed hands, as it were, for 20 years. You know, they've been either Labour run or a Conservative run or something for years and years and years. And you got to have kind of honest conversations about yourself, whether you want to be in opposition for a long time, whether you want to stand as an independent. There have been councils recently that have had a group of independents and a coalition come together of multiple parties in order to kind of create change. But I would just start looking at, you know, who's been running Lewisham for the last 10, 20 years. Has it changed a lot? Has it not changed a lot? What happened? Look in your ward and see who's run for election, what's the split of the vote and everything, and then think about whether you do want to join a political party and put yourself forward and be a candidate in that area, and make contact with the local parties that you think you'd want to stand for. Or if you don't feel comfortable aligning with a mainstream party, then I think it's about talking about standing as an independent candidate. And again, I would be amazed if there isn't an organisation of independent councillors out there, actually, but I think the LGA would probably be able to advise you on that.
Yeah, I think the LGA have a section that's specifically for independent councillors, so maybe that's a good place to look, and I can actually put a link in the chat if that would be helpful.
Thank you very much.
So the next question's kind of already been answered, but it's from Jay again, and he's asking, do you need like a manifesto to present something in front of an audience?
Yeah, no, I think that is what I was saying. Yes, if you're going to stand with a party, then you can't kind of go off on one and just make up your own, this is what we'll do if we get elected, because you are saying we're our collective, we're these, however many candidates we have, if we get elected, we'll do this together. It's a bit different if you're an independent, but I think really, yes, it's partly about feeling comfortable with signing up to a party if you're going to do it that way, and feeling comfortable that you can sign up to what they've got in their manifesto, but also being really forward about saying, no, that's not good enough, or I think the manifesto should also include this. If you want me as a candidate, value yourself. If they want you as a candidate, which they should, because all parties recognise that they lack diversity, particularly lack young people, then I think you can be pushy and say, this is what I bring to you, and I feel that these need to go into the manifesto too.
Thank you. The next question is, how can I become a volunteer in my town council, and what can I expect in a week of being one? I'm not sure if that means volunteer or actual councillor.
So to be a volunteer, you would have to go along to your council and say that you want to be involved in a particular project. So for example, if that was like tree planting, or being involved in something a bit more strategic, like your climate emergency carbon action plan, or your I know I'm just using lots of jargon, so apologies if you don't, please do let me know if you don't understand in the terms, or just something in general that the community thinks is really important. And they would ask you either to attend a meeting, or maybe to turn up on a day and maybe just spend a couple of hours planting. So per week to week, to be a specific volunteer, it wouldn't be very time heavy. So our councils meet once a month, but they also have committee meetings, so which will be themed. So they'll have like a climate change committee where people will sit on a Zoom call exactly like this and talk about what the council is going to do for that particular area. And again, you could turn up to that meeting just to find out what's going on. And then if you want to find out more information, you could say, I'm happy to volunteer my time to help the council do X, Y, Z. So it's when you're volunteering, it's very much up to you of what the time constraints that you have. And to be a councillor, so we did a big massive poll after the 2019 elections, which were our last big elections, and we found that average on week, our councillors spend 3 hours doing council work. So per week is not too much, but I'm sure Rachel spends a lot more time doing that being a district councillor.
Yeah, but even that is variable. So I spend quite a lot of time every week, probably 25 to 30 hours a week on council work on top of a job. But that's because I'm also a cabinet member. So that means I have a sort of portfolio brief, and I'm in charge of, the climate change and planning work. I think some ward councillors do a lot, but to some degree, it's as much as you have time for, if you know what I mean. So some ward councillors are really, really involved in that very local level stuff, just in the ward where they live, which might only be about 1,000 houses or something. Whereas my job at the council not only has that ward work in it, but also that kind of district-wide stuff, looking at the planning framework and all of that. So it's quite variable. I think there are some ward members that probably put in fewer than 5 hours a week, and there are some that are ward members, not cabinet members, that do more hours than I do. And to some degree, it is what you make it.
Thank you. Our next question is, from Max, and he's asking, can parish councils have any effect on laws and legislation?
That's a really good question. So as NAUC, we represent all parish and town councils in England. So we lobby government on their behalf. So if we know of something that is standing in the way of our councils being able to do things, or we think some things are particularly unfair, then we ask government to change the law and regulation on their behalf. So I'll give you a very glamorous example of something we're working on at the moment, which is called a toilet tax. So basically, as our councils own public buildings, they would have to pay a tax for having a toilet in their building. So we are campaigning saying, hang on a second, that's unfair because we raise this precept from local money, and that local money is then going back to the government for this tax. So really, this money can be better used in other places, and that's why we should not be able to pay this tax. So then that's when we lobby government on their behalf, and then if they think it's good enough, they'll change the laws and regulations. So we try and change the laws on behalf of parish councils, if that makes sense.
Thank you. The next question is, do you have to be Christian to be standing for a parish council?
So this is another great question that we get asked a lot, because obviously the word parish is very misleading. But no, you do not have to be Christian. You do not have to be any religious affiliation at all. It's just a word that sounds confusing because you think it's linked to the church, but it's definitely not. Parish just means like a small area where it's like a civil boundary. So basically it's just like an area of land that just grouped off together. And then town is a bit bigger, and that's all it means.
I think the history of that is that you're right. Some local decision making back in the 1800s was done. The church controlled a great deal, and in the late 1800s, I think it's 1894 or something, there was a local government act or some piece of legislation that effectively took away local decision making power from the church and created what were called civil parishes that would have elected members making the decisions. So there is still something called an ecclesiastical parish, which is that parish that a vicar would serve, which often actually are quite a lot bigger than a little civil parish now because churches cover wider areas. But yeah, it's an unfortunate conflation of two words that don't have the same meaning anymore.
Yeah, so we know a lot of our councils are trying to change the name to be called community councils instead, because that is much more of a open and inviting term rather than something that's a bit put off by parish. But yeah.
Thank you.
Just 1 second, I got confused with timing. We've got still 15 minutes for more questions. Yep, so sorry. So Gemma, please, yeah, you can continue with the questions. Thank you.
Okay, that's awesome. The next question is from Max, and he's asking, what barriers do you encounter to making change in your community as a parish councillor?
So I'm not a parish councillor, I'm a district councillor, but I think probably the barriers are similar. And I work with a lot of parish councils. And actually, I think one of the biggest issues that all local government has is like not properly talking to its community and doing a lot of sort of internal decision making, and they're making announcements about what they're going to do instead of bringing people along with them. And again, this is why the kind of getting young people involved is so important. When they do communicate, because they're dominated by people who fit a certain mold, a certain age, a certain sort of level of income, whatever it is, the kind of communications methods that they use can often be just talking to people like them, which means they're missing out on whole groups of, younger people or whatever it might be. So I think sometimes change is resisted by the community because the community thinks, who made that decision? How did that happen? And there's a sense of things being sprung on them. And those barriers then can be about having not really engaged properly and not used all the right mechanisms for that. And this is kind of a reason why I think younger people should get involved, is because parishes can be also not brilliant at using social media. And once they get a little bit of unpleasant trolling on social media, then they back off because they're not keen to use it. So kind of bringing those digital native skills, or whatever you might call it, into parish councils would be a really useful thing. But and this kind of goes back to some of the work I do as well. Fundamentally, change in any community is something that people always want to know that they had a part in. People can get very worked up about things changing if they don't feel that they had a chance to comment or a chance to shape that change. And I think that's when you get pushback. But also, if you only ever ask a narrow group of people what they want, you get a very narrow view of what the community wants back from you. So then parishes can become quite unrepresentative.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think another barrier also could be the influence that you want to have. As obviously very engaged people, you obviously are very actively involved in politics and climate change in general. And I would say that not all people are like you. So you might have a particular opinion in a meeting about what either is important to you or what you think the council should be doing. But I would be prepared for people who don't think the same as you.
That's a hugely important point, actually, is that I don't think anyone should go into local government thinking, well, I'll just go in and I'll get all this stuff done, without recognizing that if they only ever speak their own language, they might like wind other people up. So I think one of the things to take with you into local government is, you know, even when you're finding it really frustrating, is this strong kind of recollection that you have to keep an open mind and you have to try and see things from other people's point of view, because it's not a place for sitting Hollywood style and banging your fist on the table and going, we'll do it my way, so help me God, and all that kind of thing. That's not how it works. So you might have to bite your tongue a bit and bring some people around gently, but I still believe it's worth doing.
Thank you. That was very passionate. What changes can you make to nationalise government-run services as a parish councillor?
Oh, tricky question. Max, when you say nationalised government-run services, can you give me an example? Do you mean like education or?
Yeah, so in education, NHS, and say like National Rail, do you have any say in how these services are run?
No.
Right. Okay.
Is the very simple answer.
Not at the parish council level,
right.
No.
So even if say you know of a local school or a local GP that's poorly run and it's letting down your community, is there no outlet for that then?
Unfortunately, not at our level.
Right.
That would definitely be more of a district and borough thing, which I think Rachel can give more light on than me.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no, in that you know, certainly if you've got like state schools in your area, you can't just wade in even as a district council, in fact, and say this ought to be run differently. But again, it's about that voice and it's about that lobbying. So where I live, or where I represent, there's a hospital. It's not, you know, one of those sort of community style smaller hospitals, and where decisions are made by the clinical commissioning group or whatever this much bigger body is that deals with health right across the southwest or Gloucestershire, what I think our role is that people come to us and they're like, the physio's closing or there's not going to be this service available, and we funnel that concern, because otherwise you've got hundreds of people with their concerns and they go to the pub or they get on social media and they moan at each other, but that's no good if that message never gets back up to the decision makers. And so, you know, having a councillor spokesperson and having the kind of united voice of these local government representatives is where change, I think, can happen. But in terms of running local services, that's again where we have, you know, you mentioned the rail services. What I think, I'm working with some town and parish councils, you've got really exciting ideas about local level transport. And we know there's an issue with public transport, but sometimes actually what people are doing is they're driving really short distances, a mile, half a mile, 2 miles, when they could be walking or cycling or using a little bus. So I'm talking to a town council that's looking at laying on like an electric mini bus that just loops around the town 10 times a day or something and picks people up. And, you know, that's the kind of project that will only get going from the bottom, because it's not strategic enough for the big government at the top to do. So it's that kind of, you know, what do we absolutely need around here and how can we tackle that problem at this scale that local government is so good at? Because ultimately things have to pan out at smaller and smaller levels. And sometimes they have to be done at such a small level that only a parish or town council can deliver them.
Yeah, I would also say that at parish and town council level, and also district and borough level you are working with a lot of other stakeholders and other bodies.
Sorry.
Yeah, you do work with some of the bodies. So, for example, I'm just putting in the chat a link to Health Watch, which is a company who identify what people think about their health services locally. So that can then inform how money is spent locally. So I think, although maybe you won't have a strategic overview of something in particular, you can definitely shape the way that services are, I guess, run your area, if that makes sense.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks. The next question. Yeah. Is this presentation being recorded? I think it is, isn't it?
Yes, so it will be recorded and shared on our Bright Future website. And we will also share in the follow-up email the guide that we have produced on local elections, local politics that Rachel wrote for us. So everything, and also the slides, so all the materials will be shared at the end, like early next week.
Awesome. Ellie's asking, there are 16 parish councils in my county. Which one would I apply to be a young parish councillor? I'm in Coxgrave.
I think the key thing is to find out exactly, and that sounds mad, find out exactly where you live in electoral terms. I shared a link earlier and I can put it in the chat in a minute. There's a very useful map available from the Ordnance Survey where you can click on electoral boundaries, so you can sort of find where you live and then reveal what is this parish or what is this ward and in which district is that ward. So, you know, I kid you not, I didn't know the ward that I lived in, even though I'd lived there for 7 years. I didn't know it was called Moreton East, which is what I'm now the councillor for. So you can do that, and then you can find out which one. But you can, like in a given district, you could stand in any ward in that district. But I think it does help if you live there and you know the area's issues, rather than standing for a ward that's in the same district but miles away. Whereas with the parishes, Claire, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a sort of a radius or something. You have to live within a certain distance of the parish to stand there.
I think you have to live within the parish boundary to stand in the council, I believe.
Yeah,
but I can definitely double check that.
And again, the returning officer can confirm that all for you, because that's all down to the eligibility. You know exactly who is allowed to stand, where do they have to have lived, and for how long, and all that stuff is what the returning officer is required to tell you. I think Jay had a question about the returning officer as well, but I can't remember who it was. Gemma, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I think it was Ellie who asked the question. The next question is, can you ask the electoral officer to find out who's competing in the current election and who has competed in the past and how many people have competed in the past?
Yeah, so the returning officer, they wouldn't be able to tell you until after nomination day who's standing. So there's a point at which everyone who wants to stand has to have put their name in the hat, as it were, and there's a form you have to fill in to do that, which we'll point to in the briefing that we'll send around. And at that point, it's public knowledge. Whoever is standing in the elections, it has to be displayed on the council's website, the district council that's running all of the elections. But you can also, I mean, if you know the name of your ward, for example, you can pretty much go on Wikipedia and put, you know, Moreton East election results 2016 and 2013 and all the years, and it will just come up. It's not actually that hard to find the information on the internet. But again, you can get that information, I don't know how many years back or how many electoral cycles back, but the district councils will have it. They have these sort of PDFs, these boring things you have to wade through that literally tell you all the names of everybody that stood, how many votes they each got, and who was the winner. And that goes back for years. And in doing so, therefore, you can see how hard it is. You know, how many votes did it take to actually get elected in my ward? Do all the parties even put someone forward? How many candidates would I likely to be up against? All that kind of stuff.
That's great. So we finished all the questions that are in the PowerPoint, in the chat. I'm not sure if I should say any of the ones that I've pre-planned or...
Yes, we've got
I'm happy to
5
answer
minutes.
them. Yeah.
Yes, sure.
Okay. So the first one is what are some organizations that support young people in politics? Obviously, we've got one here with us tonight that supports local councillors.
I think the local government association also have a sort of young councillors section that they provide support through. So if you were to be running at the district or the county council level, and most political parties have a sort of youth wing as well, that they do things through. So if you decided you wanted to be a Labour councillor or a Green councillor or a Conservative or whatever, and you went that way, I think you would find support from the parties themselves as well, if that's what you wanted to do. Claire, I don't know, now you mentioned you have your Young Councillors Award Scheme and so on.
Yes, so we do have a yearly award scheme where we just basically recognise that the great work that our young councillors do. Is the question specifically about support?
I think it might be just I think I meant just support to apply, and then once you become a councillor.
Yeah, so one of the roles on a council is called a clerk. And the clerk basically takes notes of the minutes, so basically a record of the meeting, provides up-to-date information that councillors may need to know, will organise the meeting, and basically do a lot of administrative support. And one way that will be a good thing to get support if you are looking for a role as a councillor is to contact the clerk of the council, because they are legally obliged to give you support in that process. So they will do things like put up the notices to say they've got a vacancy, or put up a flyer to say, yes, we're having an election this year. So they'll be a good contact to have if you have any other questions around anything that the council might be doing specifically, like work interests, or if you have any other more like general information.
Thank you, that's great. We've got a few more questions in the chat. There's one from Ellie who's asking, if you're only interested in a few parts of it, I think it meaning being a local councillor, for example, the environment, could you still be elected?
Oh, that's my question. I went into the local politics because I am, irritatingly obsessed with the climate emergency, and that was the whole reason I wanted to get involved. What you can't do is go in and say, but I'm not going to come to any of the full council meetings because those are boring. I'm only going to do the ones about the environment. But how you would channel that, I mean, I guess at the parish level, there would be very likely already to be something called an environment subcommittee or subgroup or something like that. And you would say, I want to get more involved with this side of things. And often that's fine because it is how it is in the world. There's always someone that wants to be on overview and scrutiny or audit committee or something that involves enormously good skills at maths, which I don't have, and those people will go for that and won't want to be on the environment committee. So you can't kind of get elected just to do a bit of local government work. You become a councillor and therefore you have responsibilities across the board, but it allows you scope and influence to do those things that you are interested in, which in my case was pushing forward the climate agenda. And I think it's a huge kind of way to gain really, really interesting and useful responsibility as you're moving from school and through university and into early career. Things that you would do as a young councillor are things that you might not get to do until much, much later in life in a whole series of jobs, because you wouldn't be allowed to do them till you were in a management role. So from that point of view, it has other benefits, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Oh,
Yes,
sorry.
The last question.
Okay, so the last question is, what size of budget do parish councils have? How much flexibility do they have to use that budget, and how much impact can it make in 4 years?
Great question, Max. So we have a lot of different sized councils. So our parish councils can be much, much smaller than our town councils. So on national average, most of our councils have a budget of under £250,000. But our bigger sized councils, so we've got our largest council, which is in Chippenham, and they have a budget of just over £4 million. So once they've raised this precept, which you do locally, so at the end of the tax year, which is in April, you would ask the district council or your principal authority council to raise the precept for you, and they will collect that tax for you and give it to you for you to decide how to use that. So once you have that precept, there's infinite flexibility on what that money is spent on. I would say that historically in our councils, there's quite a tendency not to spend the precept and not to raise the precept. And that's because people think that if they are costing residents less money, that they are doing a good job, which obviously doesn't necessarily always ring true, because that means they're not actually doing that much. But so impact is definitely could be incredible. The potential of our councils are honestly limitless, because it's really all about the people that are sitting around that table together, and the ideas that the council have to do things for people locally. I don't know if you want to add anything, Rachel?
Yeah, just to add a really kind of good case study example to that, I suppose. And Claire touched on it earlier, and she said that the precept is uncapped. And what she meant by that is, when you pay your council tax, if you householder, your council tax is made up of all sorts of bits that other people have. So the district council collects it, but then they give loads of it to the county council to pay for schools and adult social care. Some of it goes to the police, and they also collect at the bottom a bit for the parish councils, and the parish councils tell them how much they want to collect. Now, if the county council wants to raise its council tax, it's capped. It can't raise it more than 2 or 3% in any given year. But a parish council can turn around and go, we're going to raise it by 100%. And if they've got a good reason for doing that, because they've clearly laid out something that they're going to do for the community's benefit, and if they were going to do it by that much, they'd probably have had to consult the community as well, then they can make that raise. And so a good example is Shrewsbury Town Council in Shropshire last spring voted to raise their precept, their section of the council tax, by 20%, which was a big jump. And 10% of that was to be ring fenced for climate change work specifically, and added to a bit of other money they had. Some of that gave them a pot of £250,000 to spend on climate projects in the town. And they were talking about investing in a solar array and some sort of low carbon transport, I think. So it's that kind of, forward thinking council that has turned around and said, we are going to raise the precept. We are going to do it by quite a chunky percentage of what is a relatively small amount of money. And we're going to ring fence that money for work on the environment or the climate crisis. Those are the councils that I'm just really excited to see what they're doing out there. And similarly at district level, fundamentally, there's never enough money to do everything that everyone wants. But if you're in the room saying this is what we should be doing, then you're more likely to get a slice of that pie.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting.
So thank you very, very much to all of you who join us today, to the speakers, wonderful speakers. Thank you for your passion and for your clarity. Thank you very much. And to Gemma. And to Gemma that facilitated.
Thank you, Gemma.
Yes, so well, thank you. So we have got another event next week, next Tuesday. Ayla will put the details, like the link to in the chat. It's about a meeting with Environment Agency to discuss their water management, their strategy going forward, and the youth engagement, and the youth governance. And we will have another event at the end of the month to focus more on the national politics and the national elections that we will have in Wales, Scotland, and what you could do to influence that and to vote. But also if you live in England, and like there will be upcoming elections, or in Northern Ireland. So to get ready on how to influence politics in time of elections, but also generally. Thank you once again for joining us today. We will share all the materials, the slides, the video, and the guide that Rachel wrote for us on local politics, following up from the event early next week. And remember also for new opportunities and events that are upcoming, we've got our social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and we've got a newsletter. So stay tuned, have a lovely evening and a lovely weekend. And thank you once again for being with us today.